Back on HQ Football Happy Hour, and we've got wide receiver free agent rankings from Pete Prisco, the deepest group of free agents at this position. Allen Robinson, Chris Godwin. Both of those guys could get tags from their respective teams, but still a really nice group of wide receivers behind them. Prisco ranks Godwin #1 and Robinson #2. After that, you got Kenny Golladay, Curtis Samuel, big name like Juju Smith-Schuster at #6. T.Y. Hilton not even on the list, but a huge name there that the Colts may try to bring back. So let's bring in Pete Prisco and Danny Cannell to talk about these wide receivers. And Pete, why Godwin over Robinson? Because that's probably, I guess, the #1 bone to pick that some people would have. I know our CBS Sports rankings have Robinson over Chris Godwin.
Yeah, well, they're entitled to their wrong opinion. Chris Godwin's a better receiver in my book. Look, Allen Robinson is a really good player. He's one of the best deep ball guys in the league in terms of going up on 50-50 balls. But I like the receivers who run a little bit better, and I think Chris Godwin runs better. He had a disappointing postseason. He dropped some passes. Didn't drop any during the season, but dropped some in the playoffs, and I think that turned off some people. But Chris Godwin is a better overall receiver than Allen Robinson. It's close, but I can see where people would like Robinson better. I just think Chris Godwin's a little bit better in terms of what he brings to an offense.
Chris, I'll tell you why. Pete loves that shiny new toy. The guy that's just coming off the Super Bowl victory, and he just saw him out there, so he's fallen in love with Chris Godwin. When Allen Robinson has been more productive with far worse quarterback play throughout his career. We saw it in Jacksonville with bad quarterback play. We saw it in Chicago with bad quarterback play. He's been the bigger playmaker. In today's game, when you're trying to figure out how to get behind defenses, you've seen Allen Robinson do that consistently. So I do think both of these guys, I'll make sure when we're arguing these points, both of these guys are fantastic receivers, but I would disagree with Pete. I would have Godwin lower at second. I would have Allen Robinson as the top prospect coming out right now as the best free agent option, because you've seen it more consistently in different franchise. The consistency with which he catches the ball gives you better production.
Robinson, the only free agent pass catcher with over 100 catches this past season. Pete, I know you think there's a chance that both of these guys get the tag. Which one has the better chance of reaching the open market?
Neither one. I don't think neither one of them is going to reach the open market. I think both guys are going to get tagged. I think in Tampa it comes down to, do you get a long-term deal worked out with Godwin? If not, then you tag him and take your chances with Shaq Barrett. I think in Chicago you have to tag Allen Robinson. Whoever's your quarterback needs him there. I think they both get tagged, so I think neither one makes the market.
I think from like personal standpoint, I think Allen Robinson deserves the longer term deal, but I think a lot of it is probably going to be dictated by these squads that are just going to have to make a tough decision and go ahead and franchise tag him as well. I do think Allen Robinson would prefer to stay in Chicago. I think he'd prefer to get a better quarterback, which they should get an upgrade at that position, but I wonder which one would be more disgruntled and have a better case. And for me, it would clearly be Allen Robinson, where Chris Godwin, I think, would be more willing to accept that franchise tag, being the younger guy who this is really his first time in free agency too.
All right, moving on to number 3. Oh, go ahead, Pete.
Chris, you could have a tag and trade situation as well. You could tag Allen Robinson and trade him to maybe somebody like Baltimore. I mean, those are possibilities as well to protect yourself from getting nothing for him. So I think that's a possibility, is you tag Allen Robinson and then trade him to a team who's willing to give up like a second-round pick for him.
Pete, at number 3, you have Kenny Golladay. Only played 5 games this past season, and it's not like he's had a bad quarterback his whole time. He's with a bad organization in the Detroit Lions, but he had Matthew Stafford.
Yeah, and this is one of the better deep threats on the market. And the problem is some personnel guys, and I talked to one last week, who think he's a one-trick pony, that all he can do is go deep. And so that hurts him. The injury hurts him. And you mentioned it. He played with a really good quarterback. Now, what helps him is when he was on the field, they're a different offense. Matt Stafford played much better when Kenny Golladay was on the field, so that helps his value. But again, he's got a chance to be tagged by the Lions as well. It's a new regime, so they're going to have to make a tough decision. It's not a guy that they brought in, but I do think there's a chance he could get tagged by the Lions as well.
Yeah, he's definitely somebody who's a little bit lower in some of the other rankings. I would probably have him a little bit lower too. Only played 5 games this past year with the hip injury, but I would tend to fall in line. Now, he is impressive getting behind defenses. 6'4", he's going to go up 50-50 balls. He's going to own those, but I'd like to see somebody a little bit more well-rounded. I was actually surprised you didn't have Marvin Jones Jr. even on your list ranked in this exercise that we're doing, where you could maybe take a shot at him and get him much cheaper. I do think there's risk that comes with Kenny Golladay that I don't know if I would be willing to take.
At number 4, we have Curtis Samuel, who has made large strides each and every season. I mean, 15 catches his first season, up to 39, then 54. And Danny, last season, 77 receptions. He's Pete's number 4 ranked wide receiver.
And not only that, but he's one of the more versatile receivers in the NFL today. When you see him get over 1,000 yards from scrimmage because he's taking the ball out of the backfield, when they're finding different ways to get him the football. And that should be very attractive to anybody considering, signing him in free agency. The fact that he kind of is this Swiss Army knife that can do a lot of different things. You've seen the development. And I'm with Pete on this one. I think this is higher than most people would look at Curtis Samuel on many lists, but I'm bullish on Curtis Samuel as well.
Pete's number 5 ranked wide receiver is a guy who was drafted number 5 overall back in 2017, Corey Davis, Pete, who really did start to realize some of that potential that got him drafted so high.
Yeah, finally. I mean, he had been a major disappointment up until last season. Here's the problem with Corey Davis. He's a number 2 receiver. If you want Corey Davis, you're going to have to pay him like a number 1 receiver, as are most of these guys. And that's the biggest concern, because Corey Davis would be a nice number 2 receiver. I think he would work at a place like Washington. They have Terry McLaurin. They need another receiver. So maybe he would work there. But the problem is you're going to have to pay him number 1 wide receiver money. And even though he made strides last year, he's not a number 1 wide receiver. So that's the biggest concern with Corey Davis.
But, Pete, you still have him in front of Juju Smith-Schuster, who's number 6. And, Danny, one of the reasons why Pete has him out of the top 5 is because his yards per target was 6.5 last season. That's like half of what he was doing his rookie season when his yards per target was 11.5.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say it was because he was TikTok dancing before the game. I thought that was going to be why Pete had him out in the top 5. I do think that is a significant concern. I would have Juju Smith-Schuster higher than Pete does here, but I do think there is concern. When his numbers were put up, it was across from Antonio Brown. This last year with Chase Claypool on the other side, he did have one of his better years. And there is an immaturity issue that is something to come into question when you're talking about a player who was becoming more of a story off the field for what he was doing than what he was becoming on it, where he is this brand. But I do think he will command probably bigger dollars than a lot of guys that you could get better value at and possibly better production. But I still think he's uber talented at the wide receiver position. If you could get him that opportunity, or I think he could be a number 1. I think this is one of those guys that could be a number 1 if he has a complimentary number 2 out there on the other side of the field, where he's getting the majority of the balls thrown his way, but you have somebody that keeps the defenses honest on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, I don't see him as a number 1. I think he's a really good number 2. You have to be a guy who can really separate and get down the field to be a 1, and I don't see that from him. And that's why I have him where I have him. Again, the yards per catch numbers were disappointing. A lot of that had to do with the structure of the offense. But if you're a big play receiver, you're going to get better than 10 yards per catch. That's concerning for me. He's a tough, physical player. He would work with a team that needs a middle-of-the-field threat who does have an outside threat who can stretch the field. I don't think he's a number 1 wide receiver.
To number 7, and that's where we find Will Fuller. Pete, where would you have him ranked if he could stay on the field and avoid injuries and obviously the PEDs?
Well, you talk about a guy who can take the top off. That's what Will Fuller can do. He scares a defense. He has that speed. But again, he doesn't play all the time. He's missed a lot of time, and now he has the PED suspension. He's got one more game left on that, and that's always concerning. So if he was clean as can be and stayed on the field and played every game, he'd be higher up on this list because he does have the speed. He's the exact opposite of some of these other guys. He can fly, and everybody's looking for a speed threat. So he would be higher, but again, all that other stuff is really concerning.
Yeah, the character concerns come in, injury concerns, the fact that he's going to miss the first game of the season coming up because of that PED suspension, all of it to me is unfortunate because this is a player, he's got that dreaded word of potential. It's always been there for him his entire career with the Houston Texans. You find it so attractive and yet can't stay healthy or gets into trouble off the field. So for me, I think this is somebody I would probably just avoid as opposed to backing up, and paying him a bunch of money and securing him for a long term. I wouldn't trust it because you haven't seen a history of it on the field. So I wouldn't take it. I wouldn't even take a flyer on it.
All right, those are your free agent wide receiver rankings from Pete Prisco. You can find them on CBS Sports.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.